Heroes are rarely found in the light. They appear in the dust, bleeding out as the radio goes dead and the ammunition runs dry. Surrounded by silence and nearing the end with a jammed rifle, 28-year-old Riley prepared for the worst, until a grey-haired contractor reached out. He didn't ask questions, he simply took her hand. They sold her face to the world before she ever fired a shot in anger. The first female SEAL to make it through Bud/S. The brass loved it. The media ate it up. They put her in magazines, flashed her trident on morning shows, and talked about shattering glass ceilings. But glass doesn't exist out here in the dirt. Out here, in a nameless valley in the Levant, there is only mud, copper, and the distinct metallic smell of people bleeding out. The bullet doesn't care about gender, PR value, or history. The bullet only cares about trajectory. They were pinned down in the remains of a concrete safe house that smelled like raw sewage and cordite. The roof had caved in 3 hours ago during the first mortar barrage. Now it was just her, a radio operator named Hayes with shrapnel in his thigh, and 3 unnamed agency guys who had hired them for what was supposed to be a low-visibility escort. The escort went south. Very south. She was huddled against a crumbling, load-bearing wall, spitting grit out of her teeth. Her right arm hung uselessly at her side. A ricochet had caught her just under the collarbone, missing the plate, splintering the clavicle. The pain wasn't a sharp stab anymore. It was a deep, nauseating throb that pulsed in time with her heart. Every time her heart beat, the world tilted. She looked down at her rifle. A heavily modified SR-25, heavy barrel, night force optic, suppressed. It was a sniper's tool, built for reaching out and touching someone quietly. Now it was just a 9-pound paperweight resting on her lap. She couldn't lift it. She couldn't brace it. "Comms," she rasped, her voice sounding like crushed glass. Hayes was pale, his hands trembling as he held pressure on his leg. He shook his head. "Nothing. QRF is still 20 mics out. Maybe 30. Jamming is heavy. 30 minutes. In a firefight, 30 minutes is a lifetime. It's an eternity." They didn't have 3 minutes. Across the room, the 3 agency guys were spaced out, covering the broken windows. 2 of them were young, built like linebackers, wearing sterile tactical gear that looked like it hadn't seen enough dirt. They were scared. She could see it in the way their shoulders hitched every time a round snapped overhead. The 3rd guy was different. She hadn't paid much attention to him at the briefing. He was older, late 50s, maybe early 60s, faded flannel shirt, unbranded chest rig, a battered ball cap pulled low. He moved with a slow, deliberate shuffle that screamed bad knees and lower back pain. The younger guys called him Artie. He hadn't said a word the entire trip, just chewed on a toothpick and stared out the window of the armoured cruiser. Now Artie was kneeling by the eastern wall. He wasn't shooting. He was just watching. A heavy machine gun opened up from the ridgeline, the thump-thump-thump of a DSHK chewing through the concrete above their heads. Dust rained down in sheets. Hayes flinched, curling into a ball. The 2 young agency guys ducked hard, burying their faces in their arms. Artie didn't blink. He reached up, casually brushing a chunk of plaster off his shoulder, his eyes never leaving the gap in the wall. "They're walking it down," she said, forcing the words through gritted teeth. She tried to shift her weight and barely swallowed a scream. "They're suppressing us. Foot mobiles are going to flank." "Already are," Artie said. His voice was gravelly, quiet, but it cut right through the ringing in her ears. He didn't look at her. 3 elements, 4 men each, pushing up the draw on the right. She blinked through the sweat and dirt stinging her eyes. He was right. If they got up that drawer, they'd have an angle right into this room. They'd be fish in a barrel. "Hayes, give me your M4, one of the young agency guys yelled, his voice cracking with panic. "I need more mags." "Conserve your ammo, kid," Artie said, still not raising his voice. "You're shooting at shadows." "They're going to overrun us, old man," the kid snapped back, his eyes wide and frantic. Artie finally turned his head. He looked at the kid, just looked at him. There was no anger in his eyes, no fear, just a heavy, suffocating exhaustion. It was the look of a man who had seen this exact scenario play out 100 times before and was thoroughly bored by the repetition. "Nobody is getting overrun today," Artie said flatly. He stood up. He didn't crouch. He didn't scurry. He just stood up in the middle of a room taking heavy fire, moving with an eerie, terrifying calmness. He walked over to her. Up close, she could see the map of lines on his face, the faded white scars cutting through the grey stubble on his jaw. His eyes were a pale, washed-out blue. "You're the shooter they sent us," he said. It wasn't a question. "I was," she muttered, nodding down at her ruined shoulder. Blood was pooling in the fabric of her combat shirt, thick and sticky. "Collarbone is gone. Can't mount the gun." Artie looked down at the SR-25 in her lap. He stared at it for a long, quiet second. The DSHK opened up again. Bullets chewed through the exterior wall. A piece of rebar screamed as it twisted. The young guys were yelling something, but the sound was drowned out by the chaos. "Wind is coming off the valley floor," Artie said, entirely ignoring the noise. "3/4 value, maybe 10 knots." She stared at him. 12, she corrected instinctively. "It shifts at the crest." Artie nodded slowly. He reached down. "Give me the rifle, kid." She hesitated. One doesn't hand a primary weapon over to a stranger. It's an extension of the body. Her rifle was zeroed to her eye, her cheek welled, her trigger pull. The trigger was a 2-stage match grade, set so light that breathing on it wrong would send a round down range. The glass was dialed for her vision, but she couldn't use it, and the men coming up the drawer weren't going to politely wait for her to heal. She took her left hand, gripped the handguard, and held it up. Artie took it. The moment his hands closed around the weapon, something shifted in the room. It was difficult to explain, but the air pressure felt different. He didn't grab it like the young agency guys grabbed their carbines, gripping too tight, knuckles white, treating the gun like a shield. Artie took the heavy sniper rifle like it weighed nothing at all. His hands slid into position with a fluid, mechanical grace. He didn't check the chamber by ripping the charging handle back. He did a press check, but he did it one-handed, rolling the rifle slightly, using his thumb to ease the bolt back just enough to feel the brass in the chamber in the dark, then pressing the forward assist with the heel of his hand to seat it. Click, clack. It was a very specific sequence. Fast, silent, efficient. She knew that check. She had seen it in old training videos at Coronado. It was a relic, a remnant from the old CQB days of the 1990s, before all the modern high-speed tactical doctrines smoothed out the edges. Artie stepped to the wall. He didn't clear the window. He stood about 3 feet back from the opening, hiding his muzzle flash in the shadows of the room. He brought the rifle up. "Length of pull is a little short," he muttered, mostly to himself. He didn't adjust the stock. He just shifted his shoulder geometry to make it work. He peered through the Night Force scope. His hand hovered over the elevation turret. He didn't look at the dial. He didn't count the clicks out loud. His thumb and index finger just rolled the turret. Click, 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 click. Pure muscle memory. He knew exactly how many mils he was dialing in just by the tactile feel of the gears. "They're at 400 meters, she warned him, fighting a wave of dizziness. "Target is moving." 420, Artie corrected softly. He exhaled. The breath left his lungs in a long, slow hiss. His body went completely still. Even in the middle of a war zone, with dust falling and men screaming, he became a statue. Crack. The suppressed rifle spat. It wasn't loud, just a sharp whip crack that cut through the heavier booms outside. Artie didn't check to see if he hit. The split second the rifle fired, he racked the bolt. It was a semi-auto, but he instantly tracked to the next target. He didn't admire his work. Crack. 2 seconds passed. Crack. The DSHK on the ridgeline suddenly went silent. The heavy, rhythmic thumping stopped abruptly, leaving a ringing void in the air. "Gunner is down!" one of the young agency kids yelled, disbelief coloring his voice. "He just dropped the heavy gunner!" Artie ignored him. He shifted his stance, swinging the muzzle toward the draw on the right. "Distance," he demanded. 300, she coughed, her vision swimming. "Closing fast." "Hold," Artie whispered to the rifle. He waited. He didn't shoot wildly into the brush. He waited for a target to present itself. The patience was terrifying. It wasn't the patience of a sniper waiting for a high-value target. It was the cold, industrial patience of a butcher working a line. Crack. Crack. 2 more shots. 2 more bodies in the dirt outside. The flanking element broke. She could hear them shouting in Arabic, their voices tight with panic. They had thought the team was pinned. They thought they were blind. Suddenly, their heads were exploding in the dust, and they couldn't even see the muzzle flash. Artie lowered the rifle. He kept his eyes on the draw for another 10 seconds, then slowly stepped back from the wall. He hit the magazine release, catching the half-empty mag in his palm, and swapped it with a fresh one from her rig without even looking at her chest. He seated the new mag with a sharp smack. He crouched back down next to her, resting the rifle across his knees. He looked completely unaffected. His breathing wasn't even elevated. "Good rifle," he said quietly. "Trigger is a little light for the dirt, but the barrel is true." She stared at him. The pain in her shoulder was a roaring fire, but her mind was spinning faster. The press check, the blind turret adjustments, the total lack of physiological stress. "Who taught you to check a chamber like that?" she asked. Her voice was a whisper. Artie looked down at the rifle. For a second, a shadow crossed his face. Not fear, just a deep, ancient grief. "An old friend," he said softly. "Long time ago." "They don't teach that anymore," she pushed, swallowing hard. "They haven't taught that since the old Naval Special Warfare Group days, since before the towers fell." Artie didn't answer. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a fresh toothpick, and stuck it in the corner of his mouth. She looked at his hands. There was a scar running across the back of his right hand. It looked like a burn mark, shaped vaguely like a crescent moon. Her heart stalled. Every SEAL in the teams knows the ghost stories. They are heard at the bars in Virginia Beach. They are heard by the fire pits in San Diego. The stories about the men who wrote the book Everyone Operates By. The men who went into the dark places in the 80s and 90s, when there was no drone support, no medevac, no glory. There was a story about a man in Mogadishu, a sniper who stayed behind on a rooftop when the exfil choppers couldn't land. They said he held off 200 militia members with a bolt-action rifle until he ran out of bullets, then used his sidearm, then used a knife. They said he took a piece of hot shrapnel to the right hand, branding him with a crescent scar. They said his call sign was Pilgrim. She stared at the scar on his hand. Then she looked up at his washed-out blue eyes. "You're supposed to be dead," she breathed. "They said you died in a helicopter crash off the coast of Yemen in 2004. Artie looked at her. The corner of his mouth twitched, barely a smile. It was a sad, tired expression. "Dying is easy, kid," he said, his voice barely audible over the distant crackle of burning brush. "It's the paperwork afterward that's a bitch." He didn't ask how she knew. He didn't confirm a name. He didn't have to. The man sitting next to her in a blown-out Syrian toilet was a myth, a legend that recruits whispered about to keep themselves motivated during Hell Week. And here he was, wearing a faded flannel shirt, working a low-rent contractor gig. "Why are you here?" she asked. The cynical part of her brain, the part that hated the Navy PR machine, the part that hated the politics of her own existence, couldn't comprehend it. "You gave them everything. Why are you still in the dirt?" Artie looked back out the ruined window. The sky was beginning to turn a bruised purple as evening set in. "Because the dirt is the only place that makes sense," he said quietly. "Up there in the light, it's all just talk. Down here, the math is always honest." He racked the bolt on her rifle, chambering a fresh round. "And the math says they're coming back." Night falls fast in the desert. It doesn't ease in. The sun just drops behind the jagged peaks, and the heat bleeds out of the air, replaced by a creeping, shivering cold. With the dark came the quiet. But it was the wrong kind of quiet. It was the pregnant, heavy silence of men shifting into assault formations just beyond the tree line. She sat against the wall, shivering. Blood loss was taking its toll. Her fingers felt thick and numb. The pain in her shoulder had crystallized into a burning iron spike driven straight down through her chest. Every breath was shallow, rationed. Beside her, haze was fading. The tourniquet on his leg had stopped the arterial bleed, but his skin was the color of old wax. The two young agency contractors, whose names she hadn't bothered to learn, were hyperventilating. Their night vision goggles cast an eerie, pale green glow against their terrified faces. They kept shifting their carbines, sweeping empty corners, burning adrenaline they couldn't afford to lose. Artie didn't have night vision. He hadn't brought a helmet. He just had her rifle, his faded flannel, and that infuriating, unnatural stillness. "They're waiting for the moon," she whispered, her voice sounding hollow in her own ears. "Once it crests the ridge, they'll push." Artie didn't look at her. He was staring through the night force optic, letting the massive objective lens gather the scarce ambient light. "They won't wait for the moon. The moon gives us silhouettes. They'll push on the blackout." He reached back, his hand blindly finding her chest rig. He pulled a spare magazine from her pouch. "Load it," he ordered softly. She looked at the magazine, then at her useless right arm. She pinned the mag between her knees and used her left hand to strip loose 7.62 rounds from a bandolier, pressing them into the feed lips. The brass was cold. Her thumb slipped, smearing blood over the casing. She pushed it down anyway. Click, click, click. The mechanical sound grounded her. It gave her a job. It kept her from focusing on the cold spreading up her legs. "You really think the math is honest out here?" she asked, breathing through her teeth as a fresh wave of nausea hit her. "They sent us into a blind canyon with zero air support and jammed comms. The math says we're dead." Artie shifted his weight. "Math doesn't care about politics. It doesn't care about the brass or the PR photos they took of you in Coronado. It only cares about angles, distance, ammunition, and blood." He paused, his finger resting lightly on the trigger guard. "You're a SEAL. You earned the trident. Stop thinking like a poster child and start thinking like a rifleman." The words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. For 2 years, she had been the Navy's favorite talking point. Look at her. Look at what she overcame. She had started to believe her own press clippings, but the men outside in the dark didn't know her name. They didn't care about her gender. To them, she was just a heat signature to be extinguished. "Movement," one of the young contractors hissed, his voice pitching up an octave. "I got movement by the burned-out truck, 10 o'clock. "Hold fire," Artie said. "He's got an RPG," the kid screamed. "Hold fire," Artie repeated. His voice was a flat line on a heart monitor. The kid didn't listen. Panic overrode training. He stood up and dumped half a magazine out the window. The unsuppressed 5.56 rounds sounded like thunder inside the concrete box. The muzzle flash lit up the room like a strobe light, blinding everyone not wearing tubes. It was exactly what the enemy wanted, a probe to draw fire. The response was instantaneous. The world tore open. A rocket-propelled grenade slammed into the exterior wall 3 feet to the left of the window. The concussive wave picked her up and threw her sideways. Her shattered collarbone ground together. She screamed, the sound entirely lost in the deafening roar of falling masonry and raining dust. A PKM machine gun opened up from the tree line, pouring heavy 7.62 by 54mm rounds into their position. The concrete chipped and fractured, filling the air with jagged, blinding dust. Through the chaos, through the smoke and the terror, Artie moved. He didn't drop to the floor. He sidestepped the incoming fire, finding a new angle through a fissure in the crumbling wall. He brought the SR-25 up. He didn't rush. He mounted the gun, anchored his cheek weld, and went to work. Crack. "RPG down," he announced quietly. Crack. "PKM loader down." He worked the rifle like a mechanic working an engine block. There was no emotion, no anger. He was simply solving a geometric problem. Target, distance, wind, holdover, squeeze, over and over. But there were too many of them. The flanking element they thought they had broken earlier had regrouped. They hit the eastern wall hard. Bootsteps crunched on the gravel right outside. They were in hand grenade range. "Frag!" one of the contractors yelled. A small, heavy object bounced through the window opening, clattering on the concrete floor. A Russian F-1 grenade, the Lehman. It has a 3 to 4 second fuse. Time didn't slow down. That's a movie myth. Time sped up. It compressed into a terrifying singular point of panic. She tried to scramble backward, but her legs wouldn't obey. Artie didn't dive for cover. He kicked it. He stepped forward, caught the grenade on the instep of his boot, and flicked it back out the window like a soccer player clearing a ball. He didn't even watch it fly. He instantly brought the rifle back up. Boom! The grenade detonated mid-air right outside the window. A man screamed in the dark. "Doorway!" she choked out, pointing with her left hand. 2 fighters breached the ruined doorway on the far side of the room. They had AK-47s at the low ready. The young agency contractor spun around, but his rifle jammed. A classic double feed caused by panic gripping the magazine. Artie couldn't swing the long sniper rifle around fast enough in the tight quarters, so he didn't try. He dropped his left hand from the handguard, drew a battered Glock 19 from his hip in a fraction of a second, and fired 3 times. Pop, pop, pop. 1 round into the first man's chest, 2 into the second man's face. They dropped like they had been unplugged. Artie reholstered the pistol in the same fluid motion and went right back to the optic on the rifle. "Rear reload," he said. She slid the magazine she had packed across the floor. He dropped the empty one, scooped up the fresh one, and seated it. "They're breaking," Artie said, his breathing finally showing a slight edge of exertion. "We broke their momentum." She leaned her head back against the wall, gasping for air. The math. He was just doing the math. He was systematically subtracting the enemy's assets until they no longer had the equation to win. Then, over the ringing in her ears, she heard it. The faint, rhythmic wub-wub-wub of heavy rotor blades cutting through the cold desert air. QRF, Hayes laughed weakly from the floor, spitting up a little blood. They're here. The Apaches came first. They didn't announce themselves with sirens. They announced themselves with the terrifying, tearing canvas sound of 30mm chain guns. The ridgeline lit up in a continuous, rolling wave of explosive fire. The ground shook. Dust fell from the ceiling in heavy clumps. Whatever was left of the assault force out there was being vaporized. Seconds later, 2 UH-60 Blackhawks swooped low over the valley floor, their door gunners laying down, suppressing fire into the tree line. The deafening roar of the turbines washed over the ruined safe house, blowing the stagnant smoke and dust out through the shattered windows. The fight was over, just like that. The switch had been flipped from life and death to extraction logistics. Outside, boots hit the dirt. Flashlights cut through the dark. American voices shouted commands in English. "Clear left! Pushing up! Blue, blue, blue!" She let her head fall forward, her chin resting on her chest. The adrenaline was evaporating, leaving behind a cold, hollow shell of exhaustion. Her shoulder screamed with every heartbeat. She felt a hand on her good arm. It was a ranger medic from the QRF team. He was young, maybe 20, his eyes wide as he took in the carnage of the room. He took one look at her shoulder, pulled out trauma shears, and started cutting her kit away. "I got you, ma'am," the kid said, his hands moving fast. "We're getting you on the bird. You're going to be fine." "Ma'am," it sounded strange out here. It sounded like a civilian word. She looked up, ignoring the medic packing gauze into her shoulder. She searched the room. The 2 agency contractors were outside, sitting on the dirt, smoking cigarettes with shaking hands. QRF guys were moving through the rubble, securing the perimeter. Artie was standing in the corner. He wasn't talking to the rescue team. He wasn't giving a debrief. He was just standing there, in the shadows, quietly pressing the magazine release on her rifle. He caught the mag, pocketed the unspent rounds, and locked the bolt to the rear to show clear. He walked over to her. The medic stepped back, intimidated by the sheer, quiet presence of the older man. Artie knelt down. He didn't look at the bloody mess of her shoulder. He looked her dead in the eye. Up close, in the beam of the medic's headlamp, he looked impossibly old. The lines on his face were deep trenches of accumulated grief. He held out her rifle. "Take it," he said. She reached up with her left hand and gripped the handguard. The metal was still warm from the friction of the firefight. Artie didn't let go immediately. He kept his grip on the stock, forcing her to hold his gaze. "They're going to put you back on television when you heal," he said, his voice a low gravel rumble that barely cut through the noise of the helicopters outside. "They're going to ask you what it was like. They're going to want a hero story." She swallowed the dry lump in her throat. "What do I tell them?" Artie's eyes softened, just for a fraction of a second. "Tell them it's just dirt and math. Tell them there's no glory in a concrete box. You wear the bird and the frog on your chest, kid. That doesn't make you a symbol. It makes you a technician. Do the job. Stay in the shadows. The light only blinds you." He let go of the rifle. The weight of it settled against her lap. "Hey," she called out as he stood up. "Pilgrim." He stopped, but he didn't turn around. "Thank you." Artie just reached into his pocket, pulled out a fresh toothpick, and walked out the ruined doorway. 2 minutes later, they loaded her onto a stretcher. The rotor wash of the Black Hawk whipped her hair across her face as they hoisted her into the cabin. She looked down at the landing zone. Dozens of operators were moving in the chaotic ballet of exfiltration. She scanned the faces, the gear, the weapons. She was looking for a faded flannel shirt, a man with a bad back and a crescent scar on his hand. He wasn't there. He had melted back into the logistics, back into the dark, back into the myth where he belonged. She laid her head back against the nylon netting of the helicopter as it banked hard, lifting them away from the valley. She clutched the heavy SR-25 to her chest with her good arm. The metal was cold now. The PR machine was waiting for her back home. The cameras, the questions, the narrative. They would want to turn this night into a triumph. But she knew the truth. She knew the math. And she knew that the deadliest man in the world didn't exist in the light. He existed in the spaces between the bullets, quietly doing the violent arithmetic that allowed the rest of them to live. She closed her eyes, and for the first time since the mortar hit, she finally let herself sleep. If this story hit you where it counts, hit that like button, share it with someone who respects the silent professionals, and subscribe to the channel for more raw, grounded stories from the shadows. The algorithms don't like the ugly truth of the dirt, so we rely on you to keep these stories alive. Drop a comment below. What do you think the math really costs? Stay safe out there.